Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. The late summer sun filtered through the windshield as Vince Lowe guided the ambulance through downtown traffic, his partner Ray Gray riding shotgun with a breakfast burrito balanced on his knee. They've been working together for 6 years now, long enough that their conversations flowed with the easy rhythm of old friends. Vince was 42, built solid from years of lifting patients and gym sessions that kept his mind clear. His dark hair showed gray at the temples, earned honestly from 12 years of emergency medicine. "So Ethan's trying out for travel soccer?" Ray asked between bites. "Yeah, kid's got his mother's determination." Vince smiled, thinking of his 9-year-old son. "Practice is 4 times a week, but he's excited about it." Claudia must be thrilled about the driving schedule. Vince's expression shifted slightly. "She's been distracted lately. Her mother's not doing well. Deborah had another fall last week." "The one in Riverside?" "Yeah, Claudia's been spending more time there. Actually, her brother moved in to help out." Ray raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know she had a brother." "Neither did I, really. Greg. He's been living out of state for years. Construction work, I think. They weren't close." Vince shrugged. "Ethan's been spending weekends there when Claudia visits. Says his uncle's teaching him woodworking." The radio crackled before Ray could respond. "Unit 23, respond to 1847 Riverside Drive. 9-year-old male, possible injury. Caller extremely distressed." Vince reached for the radio, then froze. "That's Deborah's address." He flipped the lights and sirens, his training overriding the ice forming in his chest. Ray grabbed the dashboard as Vince accelerated, weaving through traffic with controlled precision. Neither spoke. The 7-minute drive felt like drowning. They pulled up to the neat brick house with its manicured lawn. Vince was already moving before the ambulance fully stopped, grabbing his medical bag. The front door stood open. He forced himself to breathe, to focus. Whatever this was, Ethan needed a paramedic, not a panicked father. Inside, the living room looked untouched. Doilies on the side tables, family photos on the mantel, everything in Deborah's particular order. Then he heard it, a soft, hitching breath from the hallway. Ethan sat on the hardwood floor, back against the wall, wearing a t-shirt that hung loose on his small frame. His face was pale, tear-streaked. Next to him sat a man Vince had only seen in old photographs. Tall, thin, with sandy hair and a weak chin. Greg Roberson looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Dad." Ethan's voice cracked. "I'm okay, Dad." Those 4 words, delivered in that specific tone, the forced calm of a child trying to comfort an adult, sent warning signals through Vince's nervous system. He crouched down, maintaining professional distance, even as everything in him wanted to scoop his son into his arms. "Hey, buddy, I'm here. We're going to check you out." "Okay." Ray moved past Vince, setting up the equipment with practiced efficiency. He began the standard examination, vitals, pupils, checking for obvious trauma. Greg stood up, backing toward the kitchen. "He just fell," Greg said. His voice was too even, rehearsed. "Playing in the backyard. I called as soon as I found him." "Where's Claudia?" Vince asked, not looking at Greg. "She went to the pharmacy. Her mother needed prescriptions." Ray's hands moved over Ethan's arms, his neck following protocol. Then he reached to lift the back of the boy's shirt. Ethan flinched. Ray's fingers stopped. His eyes met Vince's for one sharp second, and Vince saw something there that made his blood turn to ice. "Vince," Ray said quietly. "Step back." "What?" "Step back right now." Ray's voice had no give in it. "I need you to call the police." "What are you?" Ray gripped Vince's arm hard enough to hurt. "Don't touch him. Call the police. Now." Vince's paramedic brain was still trying to process, to catalog symptoms and make assessments. But Ray's expression told him everything he needed to know about not looking. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed. Then Ray shifted position, and Vince saw Ethan's back. The medical bag slipped from Vince's fingers, supplies scattering across the floor. His vision tunneled. The patterns on his son's skin weren't from a fall. They were precise, methodical, recent and old. Burns, cuts, bruises in various stages of healing, creating a topographical map of systematic torture. Someone was talking on the phone, dispatch, asking questions. Vince couldn't form words. His entire body felt like it was being pulled apart at a molecular level. Ray was talking to Ethan in a low, soothing voice, carefully not touching him, explaining that more help was coming. Vince looked up. Greg was gone. The back door stood open. Something dark and primal surged through Vince's chest. He moved toward the door, but Ray's voice cut through the red haze. "Stay with your son." Vince turned back. Ethan was watching him with eyes too old, too knowing. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want you to find out like this." Those words, the shame in them, the misplaced guilt, shattered something fundamental in Vince's understanding of the world. He dropped to his knees beside his son, careful not to touch him, wanting desperately to hold him. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Do you understand me?" Ethan nodded, but tears streamed down his face. "Uncle Greg said if I told, something bad would happen to Mom. That was our secret." Vince's hands curled into fists. The sirens were getting closer, patrol cars, another ambulance. Ray was already explaining to dispatch that they needed detectives, not just uniforms. His partner was handling everything with the cool competence that made him excellent at his job, leaving Vince free to just be a father. "I'm right here," Vince said. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe now." But even as he said it, even as Ethan nodded and tried to believe him, Vince knew that safe was a word that had just been redefined. His son would never be truly safe again. Not from the memories, not from the scars that went deeper than skin. The house filled with people. Detectives, child services, a female EMT from another unit who specialized in pediatric trauma. They were all professionals, all competent, all saying the right things. Vince watched them swarm around his son, answering their questions on autopilot, his mind fragmenting into before and after. Before he knew, after he saw, Detective Laura Wilkerson took his statement in the kitchen. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, eyes that had seen too much but still held compassion. "How long has your son been staying here?" "Weekends. For about 3 months. Since Greg moved in." "And you never met Greg before?" "Once years ago at our wedding. Barely spoke to him. Claudia said they had a falling out when they were younger. Something about him leaving home suddenly." Laura wrote this down. "We're issuing a bolo for Greg Roberson. His truck is gone. We'll find him." But her tone suggested she'd made promises like this before, and Vince heard the unspoken reality. Greg had a head start in the whole country to disappear into. "Where's my wife?" Vince asked. "Someone needs to tell Claudia. We have officers at the pharmacy now. They'll bring her here." Laura paused. "Mr. Lowe, I need to ask, were there any signs? Anything that seemed off?" Vince wanted to say yes. Wanted to list all the red flags he should have seen. But there was nothing. Ethan had seemed quieter lately, less eager for their Sunday fishing trips. He complained about stomach aches that kept him home from school twice. Small things that Vince had attributed to growth, stress, normal childhood. "No," he said, "I didn't see anything." The guilt of those words would stay with him. They transported Ethan to County General. Vince rode in the back of the other ambulance, holding his son's hand as carefully as he would hold glass. The female paramedic, whose name tag read J. Hensley, worked with gentle efficiency, her every movement calculated to minimize trauma. Vince cataloged her technique, storing it away in case he ever had to do this for another parent's child. At the hospital, they were ushered into a private examination room. A doctor arrived, young, competent, with kind eyes that tightened when she saw Ethan's back. More questions, more photographs. A child psychologist who spoke to Ethan alone while Vince paced the hallway, every cell in his body screaming to be with his son. Claudia arrived like a tornado. She pushed past the police escort, her face a mask of panic, and Vince caught her before she could burst into the examination room. "He's okay. He's talking to someone right now." "What happened?" "They said Greg. They said something happened, but they wouldn't." She looked at Vince, really looked at him, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop. "Vince, what did Greg do to our son?" He told her, watched her face crumble, caught her when her knees gave out. They sank to the floor together, Claudia's sobs tearing through her chest in ways that would leave their own kind of scars. Vince held her, but part of him was already somewhere else, somewhere cold and calculating, working through logistics and possibilities. Greg Roberson had a 6-hour head start. The police would search. They would investigate. They would follow protocol and procedure and all the rules that civilized people followed. Vince was done with rules. The house felt like a crime scene, even though no crime had occurred there. Vince stood in Ethan's room, staring at the model airplanes they'd built together, the soccer trophies, the books about dinosaurs and space. Everything looked the same. Everything was different. It was 2 a.m. Ethan was sleeping in their bed, medically sedated after the third nightmare. Claudia was curled beside him, exhausted from crying. Vince had told them he needed water, but instead he'd found himself here, in this room that suddenly felt like a memorial to the childhood that had been stolen. His phone buzzed. "Ray, how is he?" "Sleeping." "Finally." "And you?" Vince didn't answer. "How is he?" "Functional. Operating. Planning." "Need anything?" "Information." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Then what kind?" "The kind that helps me find someone." A long pause. "Then, come by tomorrow. Just to talk." Vince pocketed the phone. Ray knew. After 6 years as partners, Ray understood exactly what Vince was asking and what he was willing to do about it. The question was whether Ray would help or try to stop him. The next morning, Detective Wilkerson arrived with updates. They found Greg's truck abandoned at a bus station in Arizona. Security footage showed him boarding a Greyhound to El Paso. The trail went cold from there. "We're coordinating with Texas authorities," she explained. "His face is in the system. If he surfaces, we'll know." "If," Vince repeated. "I know it's not what you want to hear, but I've been doing this 23 years. Men like Greg Roberson, they think they're smart enough to disappear. Eventually, they slip up. They use a credit card, contact someone they shouldn't, get pulled over for a taillight. We'll get him." "How long?" Laura met his eyes. "I can't answer that." "Guess." She sighed. "Could be weeks. Could be months. Could be years." Vince finished. "Could be years. We'll do everything we can." But everything they can had limits. Legal limits. Jurisdictional limits. Budget limits. Greg Roberson was now one file among thousands, and every day that passed made him harder to find. That afternoon, Vince met Ray at a diner on the south side. They sat in a back booth, coffee going cold between them. "He's in the wind," Vince said. "I know. The police are doing what they can." "I know. It's not enough." Ray leaned back. "No, it's not. I need to find him." "That's a bad idea." "I know." They sat in silence. Ray drummed his fingers on the table, a tell Vince recognized from years of watching him work through difficult decisions. "My cousin," Ray finally said, "used to be military intelligence. He's private sector now. Does background checks, surveillance, that kind of thing. Not exactly legal for all his work, but he's good. Will he help? For you?" "Yeah." "But Vince," Ray leaned forward. "Whatever you're planning, think it through. You have a son who needs his father. Don't do something that puts you in prison." "Greg tortured my son for months. In my mother-in-law's house. While I was working 12-hour shifts saving other people's kids." Vince's voice stayed level, but his hands shook. "He burned him. Cut him. Made him too afraid to tell anyone. And now he's going to disappear into the woodwork, and maybe someday the police will get lucky. So what's your plan? Find him and beat him to death." "I don't know yet." That was the truth. The rage inside Vince wanted simple violence, wanted to feel Greg's bones break under his hands. But violence wasn't justice. It wasn't enough. Greg needed to understand, truly understand, what he'd done. He needed to feel the fear Ethan had felt, the helplessness, the betrayal. "Give me the contact information," Vince said. Ray slid a business card across the table. "Lou Jacobs. Tell him I sent you." "But Vince, be smart about this." Over the next week, Vince fell into a routine. Days were for Ethan, therapy appointments, gentle conversations, rebuilding trust. The psychologist, Dr. Stacy Hanna, was excellent. She worked with Ethan using art therapy and play techniques, slowly helping him process the trauma. She also met with Vince and Claudia, preparing them for the long road ahead. "Children are resilient," Dr. Hanna said, "but they need consistency and safety. Ethan will heal, but it takes time." Nights were different. Once Ethan slept, Vince retreated to the garage where he'd set up a laptop. Lou Jacobs had taken the case, and information began trickling in. Greg Roberson was 45. He'd bounced between construction jobs for 20 years, never staying anywhere long. No permanent address, no credit cards, no social media presence. He was a ghost by design, which suggested this wasn't his first time running. But everyone had a past, and Lou was good at excavation. Your brother-in-law has a juvie record that got sealed, Lou explained over the phone. I'm working on getting details, but I found something interesting. He was living in Oregon 8 years ago, worked for a school district doing maintenance. And he quit suddenly right before the police opened an investigation into allegations made by a student. No charges were filed. The family moved away before it went anywhere. Vince's grip on the phone tightened. How many others? Hard to say, but I'm finding patterns. Omaha, Tulsa, Sacramento. He'd show up, work 6 months to a year, then disappear. Always around schools or youth centers. Always leaving just ahead of trouble. Greg wasn't an opportunist. He was a predator who'd been hunting for decades. Ethan wasn't the first. He was just the most recent. Can you find him? Vince asked. Working on it. He's careful, but careful people have habits. Everyone does. I'll find his. While Lou worked the official angles, Vince worked another. He reached out to Deborah, Claudia's mother. She was destroyed by guilt, barely able to look at them. But Vince needed information. They met at her house, the scene now, cleared by police. Vince walked through rooms that looked ordinary, trying to imagine what Ethan had experienced here. I didn't know, Deborah kept saying. I swear I didn't know. Tell me about Greg. When did he contact you? March. Called out of nowhere. Said he wanted to reconnect. I was so happy. My own son after all these years. She twisted a tissue in her hands. He said he'd had a hard life, made mistakes, but he wanted family again. Wanted to help. Why did he leave originally? Deborah's face shuddered. There was an incident with a neighbor's daughter. She said Greg did something inappropriate. He denied it. My husband and I believed him, but the rumors, it was easier for him to go. He did it, didn't he? I don't know. I wanted to believe my son, but she'd known. On some level, she'd known. Just like Vince should have known. The guilt connected them. Did he mention anything about where he might go? Any friends? Old contacts? No. He kept to himself mostly. Watched a lot of TV, worked on his truck. She paused. Wait. He got a call once. Argued with someone about a job in Colorado. Said something about mountains and mining work. It wasn't much, but Vince passed it to Lou. 2 weeks after the discovery, the legal system ground into motion. The DA's office wanted to prosecute, but they needed Greg in custody. They obtained warrants, put out alerts, filed charges. Child abuse, assault, torture. The list went on. Even if he's convicted on everything, he's looking at 20 years maximum. The DA explained to Vince and Claudia. With good behavior, he could be out in 12. That's not enough, Vince said. It's what the law allows. 12 years. Greg would be 57. Still young enough to hurt someone else's child. Still young enough to enjoy a life he didn't deserve. The law wasn't enough. The system wasn't enough. Nothing in the civilized world of judges and lawyers and rehabilitation programs would ever be enough for what Greg had done. At night, Vince researched. He learned about untraceable methods, anonymous contacts, how to hire people who existed in shadows. He had money saved, enough to finance options he'd never considered before. But every option fell hollow. Hiring someone to hurt Greg, even to kill him, wouldn't satisfy the need burning in Vince's chest. This had to be personal. It had to be precise. Greg needed to know exactly who was destroying him and why. Lou called on a Tuesday. I found him. Vince's heart stopped. Where? Small town in Colorado. Silverton. Population 800. He's working cash jobs at a mine restoration site. Using the name Gary Royce. Got flagged because he applied for a library card. Uses them for computer access, and the age on his fake ID didn't match his face. Librarian was former TSA, noticed the discrepancy, ran it up the chain. You're sure it's him? Sent a guy to verify. It's him. Living in a trailer park on the edge of town, keeps his head down. Been there 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Greg had been living free while Ethan woke up screaming every night. Have you told the police? Lou paused. Not yet. Wanted to check with you first. Give me 24 hours. Vince, 24 hours. Then call it in. But I need a head start. Another pause. You're a good man. Don't do something that changes that. But Vince had already changed. The moment he'd seen his son's back, something fundamental had shifted. The civilized veneer had cracked, revealing something older underneath. Something primitive and absolute. He told Claudia he had to work a double shift. She was too exhausted to question it, too focused on Ethan's needs. He packed a bag with clothes, cash, and equipment. No credit cards. No traceable communication. Before he left, he stood in Ethan's doorway. His son slept fitfully, clutching a stuffed bear Vince had won him at a carnival years ago. Ethan looked so small in the bed, so fragile. The nightlight cast shadows that made Vince think of other shadows, darker ones, in a house in Riverside. I'm going to fix this, Vince whispered. I promise. Then he walked out into the night, leaving behind the man who saved lives and embracing the one who would take them. The drive to Silverton took 14 hours. Vince stopped only for gas, paying cash at stations without cameras. He'd swapped his plates for stolen ones in a parking garage, another crime to add to the list he was compiling. Each illegal act felt like shedding skin, revealing something harder underneath. Silverton was a mining town gone tourist trap, nestled in the San Juan Mountains. The off-season meant empty streets and shuttered shops. Perfect for someone trying to disappear. Perfect for someone trying to find them. Vince rented a room at a motel under a false name, then drove to the trailer park Lou had identified. It sat on the outskirts of town, a collection of rusted mobile homes and broken dreams. Greg's trailer was number 17, a faded blue rectangle with a truck parked outside. The same truck that had been abandoned in Arizona. Greg hadn't even bothered to ditch it, probably figured it wouldn't be tracked this far north. Arrogant. Stupid. Both. Vince sat in his car, 3 lots down, watching. Lights were on inside. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see movement. Greg was home. Probably thought he was safe. Probably imagined he'd gotten away with it. The rage that had been cold and calculated suddenly flared hot. Vince's hand moved toward the door handle. He could be inside in 30 seconds. Could have Greg on the ground in 45. Could make him hurt. No. He forced himself to breathe, to think. Ray's words echoed. Be smart about this. Violence was easy. Violence was quick. But Greg deserved more than a beating. He deserved to experience the same fear he'd inflicted. The same helplessness. And Vince needed to do it in a way that wouldn't put him in prison, away from Ethan. He drove back to the motel and spent the night planning. By morning, he had a framework. It required patience, precision, and a willingness to cross lines he'd never imagined crossing. But every time doubt crept in, he pictured Ethan's back, the scars, the terror in his son's eyes. Doubt vanished. Vince spent the next 2 days learning Greg's patterns. Wake at 6 a.m., coffee at the local diner, drive to the mine restoration site, work until 5 p.m., grocery store, home, repeat. Greg didn't socialize, didn't go to bars, didn't make himself memorable. Smart behavior for someone hiding. But everyone had vulnerabilities. On the 3rd day, Vince followed Greg to the grocery store, watched him buy the same items, frozen dinners, beer, chips, cigarettes. Watched him interact with the cashier, curt, dismissive, the behavior of someone who didn't want to be remembered. Then Vince noticed something. As Greg walked to his truck, he favored his left leg. A limp, barely noticeable, but there. Professional observation kicked in. Old injury, probably knee or hip, aggravated by the physical labor at the mine. Pain. Greg lived with chronic pain. Vince smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, he broke into Greg's trailer while Greg was at the diner. Simple lock, no alarm. Inside, the trailer smelled like cigarettes and desperation. Vince moved quickly, photographing everything. The mattress on the floor, the stolen laptop, the collection of flash drives stacked in a drawer. He didn't take the flash drives. Didn't want to know what was on them. The police could find that particular nightmare. But he did something else. He found Greg's medication, prescription painkillers for that bad leg, probably obtained illegally. Vince was a paramedic. He knew drugs, knew interactions, knew exactly how to weaponize medicine. He worked for 20 minutes, precise and methodical. When he left, everything looked untouched. Greg came home at 8 p.m., limped inside, none the wiser. The next morning, Vince called Lou, make the anonymous tip. Tell the police where Greg is. But give them wrong information first. Say he's in Durango. That'll buy time. What are you doing, Vince? Making sure he doesn't run again. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Lou sighed. The call goes out in 1 hour. Whatever you're doing, finish it. Vince hung up and drove to the mine site. He wore a baseball cap, kept his head down, and approached the foreman. Looking for day work. Heard you might need hands. The foreman, a weathered man named Curtis Baker, looked him over. Know anything about restoration? Enough. I'm strong, show up on time, and don't ask questions. You got a problem with the law? Just need the cash. Curtis nodded. $50 a day cash. Be here at 7 tomorrow. Vince spent the day working alongside Greg, who didn't recognize him. Why would he? Greg had barely glanced at Vince at the wedding years ago, and now Vince wore a beard he'd been growing for weeks, different clothes, different posture. He was just another desperate guy looking for work. But Vince watched Greg, watched him struggle with the physical labor, the way he winced when he bent down, the way he dry-swallowed pills at lunch. Watched him interact with the other workers, cold, isolated, careful not to draw attention. At 3 p.m., Greg's phone rang. Vince was close enough to hear the panic in Greg's voice as he stepped away, someone on the other end giving him information that made his face drain of color. The Durango tip had gone out. Police were looking. Greg hung up and immediately packed his tools. Told Curtis he was done. Family emergency. Got in his truck and drove back to the trailer park, moving faster than his bad leg wanted. Vince followed at a distance. Greg threw his few possessions into garbage bags, moving with frantic energy. The trailer door hung open. Vince watched from the woods behind the park as Greg loaded his truck, preparing to run again. Then Greg stopped, grabbed his knee, face twisting in pain. The chronic pain that had been building all day, aggravated by stress and labor. He limped back inside, presumably for his medication. Vince counted to 60. Then he walked across the lot to Greg's trailer and stepped inside. Greg stood at the kitchen counter, pill bottle open, glass of water in hand. He looked up and for a moment didn't register the stranger in his doorway. Then he did. Recognition came slowly. The set of the jaw, the eyes, something familiar breaking through the beard and the rage. Vince, Greg whispered. Hello, Greg. Greg's hand moved toward the counter, toward a knife sitting by the sink. Vince closed the distance in 3 steps and slammed Greg's hand down, bone cracking against laminate. Greg screamed. The knife clattered to the floor. You don't get weapons, Vince said. You don't get to fight back. You don't get anything. Greg tried to pull away, but Vince grabbed his collar and threw him against the wall. Not hard enough to cause serious damage. Just hard enough to remind Greg what helplessness felt like. Please, Greg gasped. I'm sorry. I'm sick. I need help. You told my son the same thing. That you were sick and couldn't control yourself. That it was his fault for being too trusting. I didn't mean. Shut up. Vince's voice cut like steel. You have exactly one chance to live through this. You're going to sit down, and you're going to listen. Greg slid down the wall, cradling his injured hand. Blood dripped from his split lip. He looked pathetic, broken, nothing like the monster who'd haunted Vince's nightmares. That made it easier. The police are coming, Vince said. They know you're in Silverton. They'll be here in a few hours. You're going to be arrested, charged, and convicted. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. No, I can't. Yes, you can, and you will. But I wanted you to understand something first. Vince crouched down, getting eye level. You torture my son. You made him afraid to sleep, afraid to tell anyone, afraid that you'd hurt his mother if he talked. You took every ounce of innocence he had, and you destroyed it. Tears streamed down Greg's face. I'm sorry. I have a problem. I try to stop. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. Vince reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo of Ethan's back. Forced Greg to look at it. This is what you did. Every burn, every cut, every bruise. Look at it. Greg turned his head away. Vince grabbed his jaw and forced him to look. This is my son. He's 9 years old. He liked dinosaurs and soccer and telling bad jokes. Now he wakes up screaming. Now he flinches when people touch him. Now he has to go to therapy 3 times a week to learn how to feel safe again. I'm sorry, Greg sobbed. No, you're not. But you will be. Vince stood up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit here and wait for the police. You're not going to run. Because if you run, I'll find you again. And next time, I won't be so gentle. What did you do to me? Vince smiled. Your pain medication. The pills you take 4 times a day for that bad leg. I replaced them with something else. Something that will metabolize over the next few weeks and show up on every drug test the prison gives you. Something that will flag you as a high-risk inmate and make sure you end up in the worst possible facility. It was a lie. Vince hadn't actually tampered with the medication. That would have been too risky, too traceable. But Greg didn't know that. Greg was a coward who'd hurt children because they couldn't fight back. He'd believe anything that fed his fear. You also have those flash drives in your drawer, Vince continued. The police will find them. Whatever's on them. And I'm guessing it's worse than what you did to Ethan. That's additional charges. Additional years. Greg's face crumpled. Please, just kill me. No, death is too easy. You're going to live a very long time, Greg. In a place where people know exactly what you did. Where child abusers get special treatment from the other inmates. Where every day you'll understand what it's like to be helpless and afraid. Vince walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. I'm friends with a lot of people in the medical field, including some who work in prison healthcare. If you ever try to hurt yourself, if you ever try to take the easy way out, they'll save you. They'll patch you up and send you right back. You don't get to escape this. Another lie, but a necessary one. What? Greg whispered. Why not just kill me? Because killing you would mean I become something I'm not. And I have a son who needs me to stay who I am. But making sure you face justice, making sure you spend every remaining day of your life paying for what you did, that's not murder. That's just being a good father. Vince left the trailer and walked into the Colorado evening. His hands were shaking, adrenaline crashing through his system. But he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of completion. He drove to a payphone 2 towns over and called Lou. The tip can be accurate now. He's at the trailer park in Silverton, Unit 17. He'll be there when they arrive. How do you know? Because he's too afraid to run. Did you hurt him? Not in any way that matters. Vince hung up and drove through the night, heading home to his family. Behind him, Greg Roberson sat alone in his trailer, waiting for the inevitable knock on the door, paralyzed by fear and the belief that he'd been poisoned with something that would make his already miserable life infinitely worse. The next morning, Detective Wilkerson called. We got him. Silverton PD picked him up 2 hours ago. He was practically catatonic, kept muttering about being poisoned. We're running tests, but we think it's just paranoia. That's good news. Vince, were you in Colorado this week? No. Why? A long pause. No reason. Just asking. Anyway, we found evidence in his trailer. Lots of evidence. He's not getting out this time. How long? With what we found. 40 years minimum. He'll die in prison. 40 years. Not enough. But more than the 12 they'd originally promised. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for trusting the system. But Vince hadn't trusted the system. He just made sure the system had what it needed to work. When he got home, Ethan was in the backyard with Claudia, carefully kicking a soccer ball back and forth. His movements were tentative, uncertain, but he was trying. When he saw Vince, his face lit up. Dad, you're home. Vince scooped him up carefully, mindful of injuries still healing. I'm home, buddy. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Promise. That night, after Ethan fell asleep between them in bed, Claudia looked at Vince in the darkness. The police called. They said Greg was terrified when they found him. Kept saying someone was going to kill him in prison. Good, Vince said. Did you? I made sure he knew he was caught. That's all. Claudia was quiet for a long moment. Thank you. For what? For not doing something that would take you away from us. For staying who you are. But Vince knew the truth. He had changed. The man who'd responded to that 911 call 3 weeks ago no longer existed. In his place was someone harder, someone capable of calculated cruelty in the name of protection. Maybe that made him a monster. Maybe it made him a father. Maybe it made him both. Ethan stirred between them, and Vince put his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady rise and fall of his breath. Whatever he'd become, whatever lines he'd crossed, it had been worth it. Greg Roberson would spend the rest of his life in fear, alone, paying for what he'd done. And Vince could finally sleep. 3 months later, Vince sat in Dr. Hannah's office for a family session. Ethan had made remarkable progress. He still had nightmares, still struggled with trust, but he was laughing again, playing again, starting to believe that the world could be safe. "He's doing well," Dr. Hannah said. "Better than I expected, honestly. You've given him exactly what he needed. Consistency, patience, and absolute certainty that he's protected." "He is protected," Vince said. "Always." After the session, they went for ice cream. Ethan got chocolate with sprinkles, and they sat at a picnic table watching people walk by. "Dad," Ethan said quietly. "Yeah." "Is Uncle Greg ever going to hurt me again?" "No." "How do you know?" Vince looked at his son. "Because I made sure of it. And because I'll always make sure of it. That's my job. That's what fathers do." Ethan nodded, satisfied. He went back to his ice cream, a 9-year-old boy trying to be a kid again. Vince's phone buzzed. A text from Ray. "Coffee tomorrow?" "Sure." They met at their usual diner. Ray slid a newspaper across the table. The headline read, "Colorado man sentenced to 45 years in child abuse case." "He got an extra 5 years," Ray said. Turns out those flash drives had evidence of 6 other victims. 3 states. 15 years of abuse. Vince read the article. Greg had been convicted on 12 counts. The judge had called him a predator of the worst kind and ensured he'd never see freedom again. "You did good," Ray said. "I didn't do anything. The system worked." "Sure. And you didn't happen to be in Colorado when he was found." "I worked a double shift that week. You can check the logs." Ray smiled slightly. "Already did. Funny thing, though, I could have sworn I saw your car in the parking garage with stolen plates. But when I went to report it, the plates were back to normal. Must have been mistaken. Must have been." They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. Finally, Ray spoke. "However it happened, I'm glad it's over. Glad that bastard is where he belongs." "Me too." "And Ethan, getting stronger every day." "Good. That's what matters." They left it at that. Some truths didn't need to be spoken aloud. As Vince drove home, he thought about justice. Real justice, not the theoretical kind they taught in schools and courtrooms. Real justice was messy. It required sacrifice. It required people willing to stand in the dark places so others could stay in the light. He'd stood in that darkness, had looked into it and let it look back, and he'd walked away still recognizing himself in the mirror. That was enough. When he got home, Ethan was building a new model airplane at the kitchen table. Claudia was making dinner. The house smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Normal. Safe. Home. "Hey, Dad, look." Ethan held up the half-finished plane. "It's a fighter jet. You said we could paint it red, right?" "Any color you want, buddy." Ethan grinned and went back to work. Vince watched him for a moment. This resilient kid